Welcome to Journeys Through Sociology, a series of interviews with the Executive Committee of the International Sociological Association. I'm Lalebe Bohanyan, and our guest today is Dr. Robert Van Krieken, who is joining us from Sydney, Australia. Dr. Van Krieken is a professor of sociology at the University of Sydney, but he has spent the last 2 years in Ireland as the director of the Social Science Research Centre at University College Dublin. He earned his PhD in sociology from the University of New South Wales. He then also went on to earn a law degree and to later establish a program in socio-legal studies at the University of Sydney. Dr. Van Krieken has done extensive research on the history of child welfare in Australia, including focusing on Aboriginal children and questions of cultural genocide. He's also worked on recent changes in family law in Australia, the US, and Europe. And most recently, he's been working on a book on celebrity society. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Van Krieken.
It's a pleasure, Layla. Nice to be here.
It's great. So, Dr. Van Krieken, there's a number of things I'd like to talk to you about today. But before we really kind of get into your history as a sociologist,
Sure.
I'd love to just start with getting a bit of a sense of some of the work that you're currently doing. So could you just perhaps share a bit about what you're particularly excited about in terms of your work right now?
Well, there are three different things. Some of them are about the sociology that I'm doing, and some of it's about just being a sociologist. One thing is about that's kind of exciting, but in a challenging way, is how to position sociology in all the changes that are going on in universities these days. There's a lot of talk about a crisis in university life, and universities are under a lot of pressure, and it's an interesting kind of challenge to be able to figure out how to position sociology in that, and how to work out ways of doing sociology, teaching it, researching it, and so on, that can actually survive those kind of changes, and actually contribute to a better understanding of what they're all about. So to be able to do a sociology of what the crisis in universities is all about is an important kind of task, and I'm quite kind of interested in doing that, to be able to kind of figure out exactly how we should be responding to all the transformations that are taking place in universities. So I'm excited about that in a challenging kind of way. We've just had news at the University of Sydney that we're going to have to shed 150 staff, which has made people a bit concerned. So that's the kind of thing that one needs to be able to think about and develop a sociological analysis of. I find working in the ISA very exciting, the kind of networks that builds up globally. And so sociologists talk about globalization a lot, but the ISA is about actually practicing it and practicing the globalization of sociology itself. And the way the ISA is kind of a good kind of forum for that, and a way of actually doing globalization in sociology is really exciting as well. So I've really enjoyed all the time that I've been working in the ISA, and this project that you're engaged in now of interviewing all the executive is a good example of that, of being able to communicate better in much better ways around the world, and to give people a clearer understanding of the different kinds of sociology that are being done all around the world. So that's really exciting. In my own writing,
I was hoping you would say something about your book.
I've just finished a book on celebrity society, which is a very different topic from what I usually talk about. I usually talk about much more serious, heavy topics like cultural genocide or state formation and so on. So it's a bit of a change for me, but in a sense what I'm trying to do is to recover that topic for what you could call serious mainstream sociology. It's been neglected a lot, I think, in mainstream sociology. If you look at the core sociology journals, they don't really talk about it all that much. It tends to be a cultural studies kind of topic. But I think there's a lot to be said in terms of power and inequality, um, and the kind of economics of contemporary societies that's really important, and we have to think about celebrity in those terms. The way I usually explain it is to say there's a chapter in C. Wright Mills's book, The Power Elite, that's about the celebrities, chapter 4. And I think most people, when they read that book, they skip that chapter. I mean, I know I did, right? Because we think we ought to be talking about more serious kinds of things, but it's actually really important. And he had a very clear understanding of it back in 1957, and it's still a terrific analysis of the role that paying attention to high-profile individuals plays in the way in which power is structured, the way status works, and so on. So that's what I've been working on.
Dr. Van Krieken, I know I actually had the privilege of getting to take a look at your book that's forthcoming on Celebrity Society, and I noticed that you introduce one of the chapters, your introductory chapter, with this quote, which, forgive me if I don't paraphrase it correctly, but something along the lines of, you could tell a lot about a society by who it celebrates. And so if you could just say a little bit about, in terms of your work on Celebrity Society, how do you approach celebrity as a sociologist, and what can taking celebrity seriously as sociologists, what can that tell us about our societies?
That's a line from a Woody Allen film, and I partly put it in there because he's a celebrity. But I call it Celebrity Society because I'm drawing on Norbert Elias's work. People know him mostly for him talking about the civilizing process, but part of the analysis is to look at court society, right? So the way in which people related to each other, the structure of social relationships in aristocratic, princely, royal courts, right? So the way in which people would organise themselves around a prince or a king or a queen, and the kind of behaviour that encouraged. And basically what I'm trying to argue is that that kind of social form has been modernised, and court society is like the contemporary celebrity society is the contemporary version of court society. It's court society in the age of the mass media and so on. So essentially, Oprah Winfrey is running a salon, but in the same way that an aristocratic French woman would have run one in the 17th century, but her audience is just different, and it's a lot bigger. So she can project her salon onto the whole world stage, but the logic of its operation is actually more or less the same as a 17th century salon. And celebrities are today's aristocracy, and we relate to them. Well, we relate to them in a different way from aristocracy in the past, but the logic of the relationship is still very similar.
So the logic of the relationship is similar, but Dr. Van Krieken, do you observe any change, let's say in the past 20, 30 years, in terms of the nature of celebrity? Because many people do increasingly kind of complain about, quote, the cult of celebrity, and there are these observations that would become increasingly more so kind of absorbed in a celebrity culture. Do you see kind of a historical change happening?
Look, there's always a problem when you look at any kind of history of both continuity and change. So if you look back at that's partly what I want to write about the ways in which, when you look at the way people related to actors and actresses in the 19th century, for example, there were incredible crazes about particular individual actors that look a lot like, I don't know, Beatlemania today or something. So that capacity to generate kind of mass hysteria around an individual actually has quite a long history. So the idea itself that people can be obsessed with someone isn't all that new, but obviously what really changes is the technology and the kind of practical ways in which that can be realised. So there's a kind of intensification of it. That's one of the main changes. So the problem is to not think that it was just invented, with Hollywood and in the 20th century to look back further in history, and then to work out exactly what the changes are. And it's about spreading the possibilities for celebrity. We all know Warhol said that in the future everyone will be famous for 15 minutes, but a bit later he said, oh, I'm bored with that line. Now I say, in 15 minutes everyone will be famous. And there's a lot of that going on at the moment. So that's a major change.
So, and when I would like Dr. Van Krieken to be able to talk a bit about kind of your history in sociology,
Sure.
because your work has always involved a level of interdisciplinarity. Bringing sociology together with law, with history. But even though you continue to do quite interdisciplinary work, I'd be interested in knowing what is it that drew you to sociology in the first place, and maybe if you could talk to us about a few of the reasons that you were drawn to sociology.
In a strange way, it's almost because it makes the interdisciplinarity more possible. I mean, I suppose it's a bit excessive to characterize sociology as the queen of the social sciences, but it does seem to actually be positioned in relation to the other social sciences in a very strategic kind of way, that it just seems more possible to draw on a greater variety of different disciplines when you're doing sociology. I mean, in my own biography, I actually started off thinking I wanted to do psychology, right? So that was what I thought I was going to do. Although I'd read a bit of anthropology before that as well, so I wanted some strange kind of mixture of the two. And it just turned out that sociology was in fact the place where I could do the kind of psychology that I wanted to do. So I got excited by the Frankfurt School people and, all that kind of work that tried to link Marxism with psychoanalysis, that kind of orientation. And so I actually found I could do more of the psychology I wanted to do in sociology. And then the same with history. I could actually develop quite interesting sociological ideas precisely by drawing on historical analyses. I would always do the history in a different way from the historians. So it is historical sociology rather than history. But it's in a strange way, it's precisely what's powerful about sociology as a discipline, that it can usefully draw on all these disciplines. Sometimes that can, of course, also be weakness, right? In the sense that it means it's easy for sociological ideas and arguments to migrate to disciplines outside of sociology without people recognizing that that's where it's come from. Right? So a lot of sociological ideas have just become common currency, and everyone goes, oh yes, we all know that that's how you think about things, without actually identifying it as a sociological argument. So that's a kind of a weakness that emerges from its own strength.
Right. So the interdisciplinarity of sociology, or the openness of sociology to the influence of other disciplines, is one of the things that drew you to.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, Weber was trained as a lawyer to start with. A lot of sociologists come to the discipline from other disciplines, right? So they come to it from politics or from law, sometimes from social psychology and so on.
Which
So I think
you're
that's
absolutely
actually-
right. In most of our interviews, we've had a number of the ISA executive committee members say they came upon sociology accidentally, and they were attempting to do mathematics or whatever it was, and then found themselves kind of slipping into sociology.
Yeah. So I think that's actually one of its characteristics.
So, and are there any other aspects of sociology that you would say were important to?
Well, just personally, what I've liked about it is because it's got that kind of potential for interdisciplinary linkages. It's given me lots of things to do. Basically, lots of opportunities to build things. My father was an engineer, a kind of marine engineer, and I always used to think that what I was interested in was completely different from him, right? So the son wasn't really following in the father's footsteps. But I realized one day that, in fact, I was my father's son in the sense that I like to build things. In that sense, I'm a different kind of engineer. I like to build, I don't know, socio-legal programs or research committees in the ISA or something. And sociology just provided a lot of opportunity for doing that. There's lots of new things that one can always do, and that's another attraction that I found for it. It enabled me to be an engineer of sociological creations, I suppose.
Right, and to work on so many different things, as you said, from celebrity society to issues of cultural genocide and family law.
That's right.
Yeah. So could we maybe actually shift a little bit now to talking about some challenges as well, Dr. Van Krieken? So, in your own kind of trajectory as a sociologist, what would you say are maybe 3 of the most significant challenges that you faced?
Well, one challenge is one that's true of all academic work, which is just to come up with the right kind of balance between the ever increasing demands that work places on us and life at home and life with your family and so on. So to get that kind of work-life balance right is is a real challenge. It's something you have to think about a lot. Because the trouble with universities these days is that there's no real ceiling on what is expected of you. So because the competitive dynamics are such that it can always be better, right? So it's very hard, unlike say a carpenter who can say, okay, I've built this, that's great, I've finished with that. With academic work, it's always, oh, you can do a bit more, you could write another book, or so it's hard to ever sort of be satisfied with what you've done, and that tends to crowd out the other parts of your life. So it's hard to be a proper human being.
So I'm actually, Dr. Van Krieken, I'm really glad that you brought this up because most of the ISA members that we've talked to thus far have really kind of responded to this question of challenges from the perspective of sociologists, the challenges they face as sociologists. And you really bring up this issue of the challenge we face as human beings trying to work as sociologists and balancing all of these demands. And I have to say, I'm glad you brought it up because as a graduate student myself, I watch the professors that I work with, and I'm always amazed and in awe of how it is that they are able to balance the research and the teaching and the administrative demands and family. And I have to say, I still haven't really found out what the key to doing that is. But so I guess at least I feel reassured to hear that you struggle with it, and it's not that there's some secret that I'm missing out on.
Well, it really helps if you don't need very much sleep. Basically, I think the world belongs to people that sleep 3 hours a night. So.
Yeah.
Another one, you mentioned balancing teaching and research and admin, and that's really another challenge, right? Because you can see what's going on in universities, what has been going on for quite a long time, has been this gradual intensification of expectations of us in both those areas, teaching and research, in ways that actually contradict each other. And so we're being expected to both teach more and more students, pay more and more attention to the quality of our teaching, and to be more and more productive in our research. And at some point, those two things just don't kind of mesh very well together at all. And one of the effects of that has been for some places to create research-only positions. So you can see this kind of construction of a almost kind of 3-class system within universities, a kind of elite of research-only staff, and then a kind of middle class of people that have to do teaching and research, and then a proletariat of kind of casual part-time workers. And one of the real challenges is to figure out how to kind of navigate your way through that. Possibly develop some arguments against that kind of restructuring of academic life. But yeah, that's a major challenge, I think, to try and figure out how to relate teaching to research. I'm not sure what it's like in the US, or I don't get a clear picture from other parts of the world either. But in Australia, there's been this tendency to focus primarily on research and to not take teaching as seriously as it ought to, and that's a problem, and that's a challenge to be able to think about that properly, because in the end, it's the students that are the future, and that's really who we should be orientating ourselves towards.
Yes, and I would say it is very similar in the U.S., very similar, that most kudos are given for research and not nearly enough credit is really given for the teaching that gets done.
Another challenge is, I think I've talked about it in different ways already, but the whole issue of how to position sociology in relation to other disciplines is an important challenge, right? To get a clear picture of what it is that sociology can contribute that's distinctive, and what gives it a unique kind of voice in relation to other disciplines. To some extent, that's to do with some of the natural science disciplines. Right? So to be able to explain things in terms other than genetics or the brain or something is an important issue for sociology. To come up with a persuasive kind of account of why it is people behave the way they do, or why they relate to each other the way they do, because there's a very powerful push to try and explain everything in terms of genetics or the structure of the brain, and so on. So I think that's an important challenge for us, to be able to take up a position in public debates that explains clearly what a specifically sociological imagination can contribute to those kinds of issues.
And it seems like that's precisely what you're doing with your work on celebrity society, is taking, this topic that's usually not taken seriously in that sense, and bring a sociological perspective. Yeah.
That's right. Because everyone tends to sort of say, I don't understand why people read the magazines, or why someone's become such a celebrity. We had Kim Kardashian visiting Australia last week.
Yes, we heard about that in the U.S.
Well, she'd only just divorced her husband after, 72 hours or something?
Sure.
And that tends to be the response of, I don't understand. And I think it is understandable. It's because attention is itself a resource that some people are good at collecting and distributing, and so on. And so Kim Kardashian is a kind of industry in the production of attention, which then gets kind of directed towards the products that she promotes, or the television programs that she's on, and so on. So yeah, I think it is possible to understand what celebrity is all about.
And I think that, we tend to not only say that we don't understand, but oftentimes we're also quite judgmental of ourselves for our fascination with celebrity. On one hand, we're drawn to it and fascinated, but on the other hand, kind of uncomfortable with being that way. Yeah.
That's right. And some people will say that they're surprised that when they ask young children what they would like to be when they grow up, how many of them will say, I want to be famous, or I want to be on television, and so on. And they sort of seem surprised at that. But I think that's because kids actually have a very good intuitive sense of what you need to do to get on in the world. And being kind of recognized and acknowledged by a relatively large number of people is now a part of what it means to be successful. It's not good enough anymore to just be good at your job. You have to be good at your job and a celebrity in that field.
Right.
And that's what I think children actually kind of get a sense of fairly quickly. That's why things like programs, those talent shows and the XFactor and so on, are watched by so many people, because they're getting clues as to how you do it, how you get that XFactor.
And then I would say that, and the public is also fascinated by the idea of just any one of us has the potential to then get that X factor, right?
That's right. it's that old narrative of, from rags to riches, that anyone can make it. So it's about social mobility and status and so on. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I found exciting about that project.
So, Dr. Van Krieken, unfortunately, we're starting to run out of time, but there is one last question I'd like to pose for you, which I've asked of all the other ISA members. If you had not become a sociologist, what else do you think you might have liked to have pursued?
That's a hard question. There haven't really been that many clear points where I had a choice going in one direction rather than another. But there's two possibilities. One is I've sometimes thought about becoming a psychotherapist. I don't know if you watch the program In Treatment.
I've never seen it, though.
Have a look. It's about a psychoanalyst, and I've sometimes had this kind of ambition that possibly I could do that kind of work. So yeah, being a psychotherapist is one possibility.
May I ask, what is it that draws you to that? What is it that is interesting?
I've always been interested in psychoanalysis and the way it understands people. In a sense, sociology is about similar kinds of things. It's about trying to understand the way people behave, why they behave they do, the way they do, and psychotherapy is just a practical kind of intervention into that, or perhaps intervention's too strong a word, contribution to the way that works. So yeah, that's one thing I could have been. You mentioned before that I did a law degree, so and yeah, that was another possibility that I wouldn't mind practicing as a lawyer. So I think the answer to the question is I would either be a psychotherapist or a lawyer, or perhaps some combination of the two.
Well, Dr. Van Krieken, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having you with us. It's been a fascinating discussion.
It was a great pleasure to talk to you, Lara.
This has been another journey through sociology with Dr. Robert Van Krieken. Please join us again next time when our guest will be Professor Jennifer Platt from England.